Hey, seventh grade scholars, this is Mr. Deem. Today is Wednesday, March 18th, 2015, and we're going to be taking some notes and answering some tough questions today about the Crusades of the Middle Ages. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in, starting off with some of the basics. During this time in the Middle Ages, there were three major religious groups that all claimed Jerusalem in the land of Palestine as their holy city. Three major religions who all believed that they had the same claim or the same right to this land. To Christians, it was the place where Jesus was crucified and where he ascended to heaven. So obviously, all Christians felt very strongly that this land should be theirs. To Muslims, it was the place where their prophet Muhammad ascended to paradise. So obviously, people of the Muslim faith believed that they had the rightful claim and deserved to have this land. And finally, people of the Jewish faith, the Jews, it was their site of their ancient temple built by King Solomon. So let's identify where the Crusades are actually happening. These Crusades, or Holy Wars, as we're going to learn, all took place in an area known as the Holy Land, over here in the Middle East. This was a land that also sometimes had a few other names. For example, in class I may refer to the Holy Land with the name like Palestine or Jerusalem or Judea. All of these names refer to this same place right here. This is the Holy Land. And it's that same area that was claimed by Jews, Muslims, and Christians as their holy place. The Crusades took place between 1095 and 1289 CE. On this map, you're going to see that there are 4 Crusades listed, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. The first Crusade began in 1095, and you can see the second and third and fourth all took place within a few hundred years after that. In each one of these Crusades, you'll see that it is people going from Europe, whether by sea or by land, all traveling over to the Holy Land. And we're going to see in just a moment why they would make such a long trip in order to visit this place. Around the year 600 CE, Muslim Arabs entered the city of Jerusalem and took control. The Arabs allowed Christians and Jewish pilgrims to visit Jerusalem. In fact, Jews and Christians could live and were allowed to live in Palestine as long as they paid their taxes like everyone else. So you can see that they lived in a relatively peaceful time in which Muslims were in control of the Holy Land, but they were allowing people of other faiths and other religions to come and live and visit as they pleased. So why fight? This is what we just talked about earlier in class. What is it that causes people to want to fight? We gave a couple examples earlier, and I'd like you to keep those examples in your head because you're going to be asked to sort of retell or maybe rethink those examples in just a moment. So why fight? The First Crusade. The problem. Around 1095, a new group of Arabs took control of Jerusalem. They closed the city to Jews and Christians. So now, instead of being able to live freely and visit freely, Jews and Christians were now not able to come and visit their holy place. The solution. The Pope acted. He called for war with a volunteer army whose goal was to retake Jerusalem for Christianity. Many people volunteered. About 30,000 men left Western Europe to fight in Jerusalem. The Pope called this war a crusade, which means war of the cross or going to the cross in Latin. In general, a crusade is a war for a religious purpose. Before we move on to our next section, I also want to make note right up here in the upper right corner. You see I have a little stamp here that says cause. Cause of the First Crusade and of the Crusades, right there. Who was fighting? For knights, this was a chance to use their fighting skills, something they enjoyed and did well. Knights of the Middle Ages were trained to go to battle, so this was their perfect opportunity to show their chivalry and to show their bravery and go and fight for Christianity, for God. For peasants, this was a chance to escape from their dreary life in the feudal system. As we know, life in the Middle Ages, especially for peasants and serfs, was not a very nice place to live. Things were dirty, things were unhealthy, there was a lot of disease, and their mortality rate was high, which means that people did not live very long. The Pope promised that if they died while fighting a holy crusade, they would automatically be welcomed into heaven. So think about that. Why fight? The Pope gave a great reason right there. Fight for God, and you'll be welcomed into heaven. For others, it was a chance to have an adventure, and perhaps even to get rich. So there were people who didn't necessarily go for the fighting, or didn't necessarily go to avoid their lives, but actually to see an opportunity to maybe trade, sell things, and make some money off of the soldiers who were all traveling to the Holy Land from Western Europe. In the little diagram here, you'll see that I have a couple pictures of who was fighting. So on the left, we've got Christian crusaders from Europe, most of them knights, but as we already learned here, not all of them were knights of Western Europe. Versus, on the right side, you'll see these are the people of the Middle East who were Muslim and who were fighting on the opposite side of the Christians. So at the bottom, you'll see it says Muslim soldiers from the Middle East who were called Saracens. They were led by a great military leader known as Saladin. So that's a picture of Saladin there, surrounded by a few Saracen soldiers. So the Pope says, all Christian men of Western Europe, we need to go and we need to retake the Holy Land. It is our duty, and we are being called by God to go fight. So what happened? Well, here's the result. After about 2 years of harsh traveling, like I showed you across land and sea, hunger, disease, freezing weather, and quarrels amongst themselves, the Crusaders finally arrived in Jerusalem. After a 2-month siege of the city fell. So the Christians were successful. The Crusaders had won back Jerusalem. They were now in control of the Holy Land. Some men stayed. Some headed home, back to their manors. Those who returned brought back new foods and new forms of culture. Ding, 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 ding. Right here, we're looking at an effect. So we've already identified a cause of the Crusades, and now we're looking at an effect. Those who returned brought back new foods and new forms of culture. This is what we call cultural diffusion. There's more? Yeah, there's more. So after the first crusade and the Christians were successful, there were many, many more crusades to follow. Less than 50 years after the first crusade, Muslims reconquered Jerusalem. Again, the Pope called for a crusade to take back the city. So it's in Christian control, it's in Muslim control, back and forth. In the Second Crusade, which lasted from about 1147 to 1149 CE, it was not successful for the Christians. They made an attempt to take back Jerusalem, to take back the Holy Land, and they were not successful. The same can be said for the Third Crusade, which lasted from about 1189 to 1192. It was not a success for the Christians. They were unable to retake their holy city. Which brings us to the end. Over the next 70 years, there were several other crusade attempts by European Christians, but they were motivated more by personal gain than by religious purpose. They didn't quite have the same strength or the same backing. None of them succeeded. By 1291, 200 years after the First Crusade, European leaders lost interest. Western Europe never admitted defeat. They simply stopped asking for new crusaders. You can almost imagine this as a sports team who is strong. They have good players, good athletes. And after losing for so many, many, many years, like the Browns, they kind of have a hard time bringing it the next season. This is kind of what it was like for the Crusaders. They've gotten beaten several times in the Middle Ages, and they're finding it more and more difficult to get their strength up and to get all of their armies in the right place to create a great crusade against the Muslims in the Holy Land. So at this time, I want you to think back to our essential questions from the beginning of our lesson. Our first essential question was, when is it okay to fight? And our second essential question was, is war ever necessary? Take a look back through the notes from today. I want to use this as sort of our exit ticket for our lesson today. The questions that pop up on your screen are going to ask you to identify causes and then also the main effect of the Crusades based on what we learned in today's lesson.